Olukemi, it's wonderful to have you here. Let's begin with your African name and what your artwork is about and about your practice.
Yes. Hi, Pearl. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. And I very proudly will speak about my name. My name is a Nigerian name because I'm from Nigeria, and specifically a Yoruba name. And it's Olukemi Lijadu. And Olukemi means God pampers me.
Wow. I love it.
Yeah, so it's a very powerful name. And whenever people are saying my name, they're affirming that reality. And I think it's true.
So you have to teach me how to pronounce the name. So send you my blessing.
Exactly. So yes, Olukemi Lijadu. And I'm an artist and a filmmaker and a DJ. And my practice is interdisciplinary. I actually trained as a philosopher. I studied philosophy at Stanford University as an undergraduate and also master's level, looking at African philosophy specifically for my thesis, for my master's thesis. And I didn't know that I was going to be an artist when I graduated. But I feel like I've been an artist for a long time in hindsight. So since I was 16, for my 16th birthday, I received a video camera for my birthday present. And from that day, I started documenting my family, specifically my grandparents, because I was away from home. I was studying in the UK, and up until leaving Nigeria for the UK, I'd been very, very close to my grandparents. So I developed this anxiety about not being around them or them potentially passing away whilst I was not there. So the camera for me was a way of holding on to their memories, and also became a way to have conversations. I could put the camera in front of them and ask them about their life and what was it like living in Nigeria in the 80s and the 70s, and who are they and what words of wisdom do they have for my potential children and their children. To me, it was very magical having the camera.
Let's start from the very beginning. So you went to boarding school here?
Yes.
Right. At what age?
I went to boarding school here at 13.
At 13. So then why did you choose to go to Stanford? And when philosophy is not really, you don't go to Stanford to study philosophy. You study technology, you study all other things. Why Stanford?
Palm trees, that's why.
Palm trees?
Palm trees and the sun.
I would have expected that you would have gone to SOAS, right?
Palm trees and the sun. I live in the UK now. I'm managing it, but
I still like the palm trees.
I feel most alive in the warmth, with the sunshine. And so I just knew that if I was in an environment where there was the sun and, I saw pictures of people on their bikes, I thought that it looked amazing. So
very simple answer.
Absolutely. But I also feel like even though I wasn't at a school that was dedicated to the humanities, in the way that schools on the East Coast or schools in the UK are, I felt like it was really helpful almost to be in an environment different from
because you've been spending so many years.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then let me ask you, what is African philosophy system? I mean, that's what I read. African philosophy system. I'm trying to make out what's it about. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So I mean, there's this challenge, I think, and I feel like you must feel this too with the label. I feel like the label of African or the label of Chinese as somehow limiting, potentially, and I think African philosophical systems just speaks to thought and what people are saying historically and contemporarily about the way that we should live, coming from people that are from the African continent, basically. So, I mean, there's a huge amount of cultures. I mean, within Nigeria alone, there are over 36 and
Tribes,
many
right?
say more, tribes, ethnic groups. And within that, their own languages, and then within those, all their different ways of living and thinking about living. So there's an enormous amount of African philosophy.
When you say philosophy as such are there books about African philosophy or how do you research about African philosophy?
Yes, herein lies the tension that I found when I was doing my studies. And that is because the Western world prioritizes sort of the written word
Yes, absolutely.
as law. However, a lot of African thought has been contained orally and is passed down through generations through oral tradition. And however, like our modes of researching, whether it be through history or philosophy, prioritize the written text as the sort of foremost sort of source material. And so when you're looking at African philosophy, there's a tension, or there can be a tension sometimes because so much of it is oral.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then that draws me to probably the North Star of my studies. And it's this woman, once again, a powerful woman called Sophie Oluwole. And she is the first Nigerian woman to earn a PhD in philosophy.
Wow.
Yes. And she's a Yoruba woman.
Oh, Yoruba again.
Yes, absolutely. So she provided the framework for my master's thesis. And she has this book that I stumbled upon called Socrates and Orunmila. And Orunmila is the central figure in Yoruba philosophy and theology. And with her research, she found that Orunmila was a real person. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, was also a real person. They lived at around the same time, and both of them never wrote anything down. So everything we know of Socrates is actually secondhand. It's through Plato.
Yeah.
Everything we know of Orunmila are in these verses that are passed down through generation to generation. So she made the very powerful argument that, yes, we take what Socrates has said as law, even though he never actually wrote anything down, it's still word of mouth in the same way that Yoruba philosophy and thought is.
How interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So what was your your thesis for your master?
Yeah, my thesis was basically discussing on a structural level how it's important for African philosophy students on the continent to study African philosophy, because unfortunately, even in many of the university curriculums in Nigeria, it's predominantly Western philosophy that people are taught.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. And also for it to be included in syllabi within the Western world, across the world globally, like just making the argument that we shouldn't totally undermine it because of the nature of oral tradition, because many cultures also value oral tradition as highly as the written word. And people can lie writing. They can also lie with, speaking.
Of course, absolutely. So philosophy actually is a great basis for contemporary art. As an artist, this is really the best basis for it. So how did you integrate music and moving images? Moving images, you just mentioned about how your grandparents has inspired you to take videos of them. So about music, you love music, and your parents love music?
I love music so much. And the genesis of my love for music really just started in my living room at home in Lagos with my dad. Both of us have trouble sleeping. So he'll come back home from work and we just stay up very late listening to music from everywhere. So we'd listen to music from the Caribbean, we listen to Lee Scratch Perry, then we listen to Aretha Franklin, then we listen to Fela Kuti. And so just
all
growing
black
up,
music.
so much music, but we'd also listen to Mozart and we listen to Yo-Yo Ma and we listen to it was a comprehensive global musical education that he gave me in the living room, basically. And we're both very obsessive. So we can listen to one song like 8 times.
Oh, I love it.
And he'll be like, okay, listen, do you see how the key changes here? Or do you see, okay, this is one version of the song and let's play like 3 different versions by 3 different artists and how did they interpret it? So it was really a deep
But I'm surprised that you didn't study
education.
music then.
I play the piano and I also play the guitar, but I didn't have role models for artists. I didn't, even though I feel like I was surrounded by music and art,
Yeah.
I didn't know many people, especially many women, people that looked like me, that had made a life of art, you know? Because my dad loves art, but he's
Yes.
a lawyer. So I always felt, okay, art is something you love, but then you're serious. You have your serious life. And it took maybe... when I was in university, I started DJing and it was very, very interesting. That's when I first started thinking about the diaspora and the music as a way of connecting people because I had a unique background.
Yes.
I was Nigerian, grew up in Nigeria,
Yeah.
but then I lived in the UK. And so I developed this, British accent. So I felt like when I was in the US, people saw me as British, even though I saw myself as Nigerian. And so I feel like my identity was, thrown into like
Of course.
a different vortex.
That's what when
basically.
we all live abroad and being sent abroad.
Exactly.
And when we go back home, we are like them, but it's not exactly like them.
Moving to America was very interesting because I felt like I was interpreted differently from how I saw myself. Being this Nigerian girl that grew up in Nigeria, but then has this British accent. And so then being seen as British, I felt would kind of like sort of erase my Nigerian identity. But when I started DJing, it was almost like I could make a statement about who I was. I could weave all these different parts of my identity together through the music I play. So I could play Nigerian music. I could then play like, British music, like the genres that have emerged here, like by Black people. And then also like the American music that African American music I grew up listening to with my father, and sort of make a statement about who I was.
But you know that we all been sent away, both colonies, yeah? And being very British dominated, we were all sent here. And then when you go abroad, they think that you are not really Chinese, but I do look like Chinese. And then when you go back home, and then you find out a lot of your friends, they went to America, they went to all different places. So it's I think you and I will have a similar experience being in a place, grew up in a place, born in a place where it's heavily influenced by British culture.
One of the things I'd like to ask you, Pearl, is how have you dealt with misunderstandings or misinterpretations of Chinese art, particularly Chinese abstract? Because I know that maybe I see a parallel between my interest in African philosophy and it being dismissed and what the work that you have done and are doing in
I tell
your
you my
field.
story. For a long time, I always felt that there was a missing link between what I read about the Chinese contemporary artists, especially I read in English, because my Chinese standard is only until 11 years old. So I always felt that there was a huge missing link until around 2004, 2005. And one of the artists gave me an online essay. Normally people would take an hour, less than an hour to finish. It took me a week to finish it because my Chinese standard is really bad. And after that, I found out all the link was connected. So I was trying to find the person who wrote that essay. And that was Professor Gao Minglu. So I said, okay, can I meet with this person? So everybody came back and said, "Oh, unfortunately, he's returned to Pittsburgh because he was the professor at the Pittsburgh University." So I said, "Okay, fine. Can you make an appointment?" So they made an appointment. I flew over to Pittsburgh. I met with him. And the funniest thing with Professor Gao Minglu was I sat down. He said, "I don't curate for a gallery." I said, "Don't worry, my gallery just opened." I mean, at the time, I think 2005, just opened 2005. "I'm not asking you to curate the show." He said, "I only curate for music." I said, "I'm not asking you to curate. I'm just coming to ask you for knowledge." He said, "You flew all this way to come for knowledge?" I said, "Yes, that's what I want," because I couldn't understand what was going on. So we had a 3 hours conversation, a really long 3 hours conversation. Every now and then he said, "I couldn't understand why you're flying there so long." Anyway, after that, I left for London. And at the time, I spoke to the ICA director. At the time was Philip Dodd. So Philip said to me, I said, "Look, Philip, I got a problem is, if I find out that I couldn't understand there was all these missing link, and I think that I want to do something about it. I want to make sure that people would understand, because what happened is all the catalog essay was written at the time. They never interview the artist. They only write in accordance from what they see. When you talk to the artist was completely different. So the link was getting wider and wider. So he said to me, I have to set up a foundation. And the foundation should be a closed-door foundation led by all the leading Western museum people, curators, museum directors, and also from the Chinese museum. And then we have a closed-door dialogue, a conversation. So that was set up in 2008. And then I invited Gao Minglu to lead the Chinese side. And on the Western side, it was Nicholas Sirota. So we had a closed door dialogue for 3 days, and it was great because it came out. And I think at the time in the West, the attitude was they were open-minded. They said, "Okay, let us try to understand with each another." So one of the professor from the Ohio University was saying that it was first time ever happened, but it was a closed door summit. So that was at the beginning of my foundation, China Art Foundation. So we would try the whole mission about the China Art Foundation, which I created, is only to address the misunderstanding and also to create this dialogue between the East and the West, and it's about Chinese art and using culture. This is another story. So go on, and then when you came back. And when you went back to Nigeria, what do you feel after being educated in England and in America? Because I saw that you organized this symposium talking about post-colonial time, whether you are going to keep all the colonial art and all that. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I feel like in a very interesting way, being away from Nigeria almost propelled me more towards understanding my culture and who I am, and Nigerian history isn't on the Nigerian curriculum. So one can be Nigerian, has spent their whole life growing up in Nigeria, but still not be intimately aware of one's culture. However, being abroad has maybe given me more access to research and given me the space to learn and be curious about the past. And so that's been something I've been really passionate about, spreading awareness, but also deep knowledge and appreciation for our own cultural history. And so in 2019, I organized a symposium with my friend Kojo Abudu, who's a critic and a writer and curator. And we wanted to have a conversation about the Brazilian the links between Brazil and Nigeria. And this is something so many people don't necessarily realize. So there's a part of Lagos, I don't know if you went to Lagos Island, the marina, that's kind of like old Lagos. And
I went to different islands, but I cannot remember the name. But next time when I go, I'm going again.
Yes.
So I will go
you
to,
must
what
do
is
the
it?
tour.
What is the called? Marina Islands?
Yes. Well,
okay,
it's called,
I'll join a tour.
yeah, it's in the area called Marina, and it's basically there's so much architecture there that was built and designed by Brazilian returnees. So basically, and this is also in my family, my father, both his parents come from people who had actually returned from Brazil. So people who had originally been taken as slaves to South America, but they or their parents had become free men and decided to return back to their homeland.
But they won't even know about the country at all.
Yes, but they came back, and with them they brought back so many skills. So because they had been, building Brazil, they'd been the ones actually, doing that. So many of them came back as architects or skilled tradesmen. So on my father's maternal side, his grandfather was called Domingo Martinez. And on the other side, and on his paternal side, they were the Ferreras. Yes.
Ferreras. Yeah. Okay. My God. Okay.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Even though I am Nigerian, very much Nigerian, there's also this Brazilian heritage. And then my mother is half Jamaican. So I'm very connected to the diaspora. And so anyway, so my mom was actually, she's an architect, and she was in a building, and she pointed out to me, she just brought it up in conversation, that the building had 2 different levels of floors, and it's because one floor, I think the structure of the building was interrupted by the Nigerian Civil War. So when it was restarted, the floor wasn't level. And she was just talking about how there's so much history in our buildings and we don't talk about it enough. And so Kojo and I decided to have a symposium, talk about the Brazilian architecture in Nigeria. And once you start a conversation about architecture, you're talking about history, you're talking about the slave trade, you're talking about migration, you're talking about cultural preservation, because so many of these buildings are not being maintained. And so we invited an artist, an architect, a photographer, and a historian to all do presentations, and followed by like a Q&A and discussions. And it was free and open to the public. And we were overwhelmed.
Oh my God.
We were overwhelmed because it was totally packed.
Let's talk about your film, Guardian Angel, which last night I was watching it. It was really interesting because there were all different threads of different music from different genre. It was there. And then you were talking about your grandmother. You are addressing religion, Catholicism with Yoruba religion, spirituality. And what amazes me is after I watch it, I was just saying to you, I was in Brazil, I was in Salvador, and it's just so connected. I think can you talk more about what was your intention when you were making this movie? And this movie is funded by ICA, right?
Yes. So I received a grant from the ICA, and that was how it all came about. And the genesis of the film really started with my master's thesis, when I was just thinking about the challenges of studying African philosophy. Even when I was studying it, I was coming up against the fact that with colonialism and with the missionaries, when they came to Nigeria, they really demonized our traditional practices and traditional belief systems. And much of our philosophy shows up in our traditional belief systems, but it's actually almost very taboo to even say that you're interested in it, because people would just be like, this is witchcraft,
Even in Nigeria?
Yes, within Nigeria, very much so, because majority of
You
the
don't
population
respect your-
identify as Christian or Muslim. And whereas at least in cosmopolitan cities like Lagos, it's actually quite taboo to even have an interest in the traditional. Yes, colonialism really worked, basically. And I was very frustrated because I was like, wow, I loved the ancient Greeks. I loved studying all the stories about the gods, and you learn about Zeus and Aphrodite and all these crazy stories, but there was it was almost like you couldn't look at traditional Yoruba religion, which was very similar in terms of having different orishas, which
because
exactly you can't look at them because it was seen as taboo. But I was like, you don't need to be in the religion of the ancient Greece to appreciate the story of Zeus or Aphrodite.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so
even when I was in Brazil, I visited all these chapels, and then I was told that they have these religious sculpture, maybe a Virgin Mary or whatever, but it's not really representing Virgin Mary because they have the Yoruba god inside the deity in representing, and how they were not allowed to worship their own religion.
Absolutely.
So are you saying that during the colonization, they have destroyed this whole culture?
I mean, it's not possible to destroy a culture, but what you can do is people find covert ways to still practice them. So you see in Brazil, it's almost like they use Catholicism as like a cover to still study, so in Nigeria, and you even see with a lot of the way that evangelical Christianity is practiced in Nigeria, it's very reminiscent of the way traditional Ifa spirituality is expressed. So I think people might not be explicit about or they might not even be aware. It might be a subconscious expression of the traditional.
I was really interested in this Yoruba spirituality. I told you already. I even went to did my cleaning, all wearing all white. Was so into it.
Yes, it's so interesting. There's so much knowledge. There's allegory. There's a lot to learn.
But your movie itself was very interesting because you use your grandmother, and then with your grandmother speaking, and then immediately you were addressing about Catholicy, and your grandmother was talking about Catholicy, and then he was talking about spirituality, and I mean, being in her generation, isn't that really difficult?
She was very forward thinking
to compromise the both.
Yes, she's very, very.
And it was, the 30 minutes movie, and with your music, it was splendid. Is this the first movie that they are really talking about African culture in a way of using religion, spirituality as a philosophy point of view?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the first movie. I think people, even within Nollywood, have been dealing with a lot of these questions and issues.
I actually like Nollywood
movies. Yes, exactly.
Because it's so dramatic and so colorful, everything.
Exactly. And a lot of, I mean, people do address it in a number of ways. But I think for me, I was interested in film as a medium because I could write a philosophy paper. Nobody will read that. I could, do a lecture, but, that's also sort of inaccessible. But film is a medium where people are able to come to it and feel able to.
You put your DJ music,
yes,
integrating with your moving image,
yes,
to address your African culture, but you're talking about religion and spirituality.
Exactly.
I mean,
yes,
isn't that really?
And actually, I do performances where the film is playing, and I'll be DJing the score live concurrently. So the score is actually something that's ever shifting and changing, and depending on which performance you come to,
Okay.
it might be different. Yeah.
When you do a movie, you're at the background. When you're DJing, you are in front of the crowd. So explain to me how, from the behind to the front, how do you feel about DJing the music? Especially, you went to 4 different continents. I mean, how was your last experience with Tokyo feel like?
Yes. DJing in Tokyo was great. I didn't show Guardian Angel there. I just played music, but I was really just amazed by the appreciation for African music.
Afrobeats.
Yes.
I learned Afrobeats the last trip.
Yes, I was invited to a party, quite like an underground party. And when we got in there, it was totally Afrobeats. And me and my friends are the only Black people there.
What?
And everybody was dancing, yes. And I really, really, really was just moved by music's ability to connect people. Yes, in a way that other ways of communicating find difficult. Music is almost its own language, in a sense that people can feel an emotional resonance. So even if someone watches my film, and that's why the music was so important for Guardian Angel, even if somebody watches my film and doesn't quite, is still mulling over what it's trying to say, the music is telling a story.
But it's very clear what you were saying. You were taking, some old picture and then questioning.
Yes.
I mean, those questions about African spirituality being lost, and then religious, because Catholicism is very strong. You speak. But I really like seeing your next movie, the clipping of sisters. It seems that you like very strong women.
I do.
You like strong women to be the main topic of your movies.
Yes, I do.
What are you trying to talk about in Sisters?
Yeah, so this is my next project called Sister Sister, and it's a documentary about the Lijadu sisters, who are my aunts, and they were musical twin sisters singing sensation in Nigeria from the 70s. They were the first female band, cousins of Fela Kuti, television regulars. They appeared on a Saturday, on a show on television every Saturday. During that period, and they were freedom fighters, outspoken. They were not afraid to speak out against the government.
Even against the military government.
Absolutely. And they spoke up about women's treatment in the music industry. They were very, very radical. They are very radical women. Auntie Kende is late, but Auntie Taiwo is still alive, and she lives in New York, and we're very close. So it's getting to know them. It became important for me in the same way that it was for my grandparents, to preserve their story, to celebrate them, exactly. And also the power of people being able to see people like themselves. I think it does a huge thing for the human psyche, just to even see.
Okay, let me ask you, do you have gender equality in Nigeria? Is the woman and man of equality? Because your mother is an architect, your father is a lawyer, and your father told me he grew up in France. So obviously he doesn't have these baggages of being, these African male chauvinistic.
I think everybody is confused. I think everyone is confused. Yes, because there's so many things that people think of as African or as Nigerian that are actually brought from colonialism. So in Guardian Angel, for example, we talk about there's that clip of the Dutch couple, the missionaries.
Yes.
And they're talking about how they're teaching people to only have one wife.
Yes. They're talking about
exactly. Monogamy versus polygamy.
Yeah, polygamy.
And the interviewer asked them, is this actually something in the Bible, or is this just a European thing? And they stumble. They're not
course,
able to
because
answer the question.
In the Old Testament, all the kings has plenty of wives and women.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
of course.
But unfortunately, and that also comes with the lack of teaching history, so many people have absorbed the colonial values and think of them as African culture
So
without actually thinking about, so many people have have imbued traditional ideas of the roles, or European traditional ideas of the role of women and men.
So are you telling me that before colonialism, you have gender equality between African man and woman?
Well, I mean, I think it's complicated. It's complicated,
Because I
but
always
it was
thought
not
that
like,
African man is very male chauvinistic.
I mean, it's complicated. I mean, there's a philosopher and a sociologist called Oyeronke Oyewumi.
Yeah.
And I looked at her for my master's thesis, and she talks about the role of women. Her book is called The Invention of Women, and it looks at the role of women and men in Yoruba society pre-colonialism.
Yeah.
And she makes the argument that actually the most salient way of sort of discerning or distinguishing people in Western society is gender, right? So man and woman. But in Yoruba society, it was actually age, as opposed to man or woman. And that she uses the way our language is spoken as sort of proof for this. So there's actually we don't have gendered language in Yoruba. So if
we don't have
you'll
this
say
in Chinese.
older sibling or younger sibling as opposed to brother or sister,
Oh, wow.
And so she makes that argument. Other thinkers and philosophers have pushed back. And so it's an ongoing dialogue. But what's clear is that the way in which gender played out in Yoruba society was not the same as in European society. So that's what I can say conclusively. But it's definitely a conversation to say. And I think equality is also a complicated concept, right?
Of course, equality. Who can have equality anywhere?
Exactly.
I mean, but there's an ideal way of of addressing.
It was different.
Fairness.
Exactly.
That's all.
I never thought of myself as a woman that I would never work, or that certain opportunities would not be open to me.
But I was also told that in African tribes, the woman high priestess is the one who rules everything.
Yes.
Who's the one who controls everything.
Yes. I mean, the various different ethnic groups that have their own orientations and configurations of how women would operate within the society. And it was never just a default that you can't look at an African society or ethnic group and be like, men are going to be the ones ruling. There are many different configurations.
I was deeply interested when I was told by the German lady, Susan Wenger.
Yes.
Yeah, and how she lead the whole tribes, being a German, a white German, and being the highest priestess, and teach and taught all these locals who are illiterate to become well-known artists.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's always more complicated than we might think. It's always more nuanced than we might think. The dynamics of the West don't always play out in the same way on the African continent. Exactly. Like for a German woman to occupy that space as a Yoruba woman, many people see her as a Yoruba woman. That's something that would disrupt Western conceptions of racial relations, So I think that's really my goal and the push of my artistic practice, which is for people to complicate their ideas and understandings of our society, our culture.
You won an award to go to Chicago to DJ and to work with Fiesta Gate. I mean, the question I have for you is Fiesta Gate doing performance art with your music as the background? And also, can you explain to the audience who is Fiesta Gate?
Yes, so I was one of the recipients of the Villa Albertine grant, which is sort of a residency supported by the French government. And so, yes, I was one of a handful of African artists selected this year. So I'm super excited for it. And I'll be supported by Marianne Ibrahim Gallery, who also have a space in Chicago. And yes, I will be researching the links between West African traditional music and Chicago house music. And Theaster Gates is the custodian of an incredible archive, the Frankie Knuckles record collection.
Wow,
yes.
really?
And so what I'll be doing is actually going into that archive. Very grateful to him for preserving it, and sort of looking through the archives to see the sonic resonances between the continent and the Americas. Yes. And I think once again, it's part of just my general sort of impetus and pull towards looking at the links between the diaspora across the Atlantic.
Please explain who is Theaster Gates, because I think most of our audience who's not in the art world would not know who is Theaster Gates.
Yes, Theaster Gates is an incredible artist. He's from Chicago, and he is a musician, an architect of sorts, researcher, sculptor, and he's really into music and Black music. Last year he did the pavilion at the Serpentine.
Yeah.
And there was like a beautiful performance there, the Black Monks performance. He sort of runs and orchestrates a choir that speak to sort of the history of Black people in the States.
But he's only interested in African American, or is he still interested in the African diaspora?
I mean, I think if you're interested in the African American story, by default, you're interested in the African diaspora.
True, because, yeah.
Exactly. But he's deeply interested in the African American experience. And so I think being able to engage with his archive and hopefully with him will just really enrich my research experience.
After that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I actually did sort of what I say is like a sketch. Like my equivalent of a sketch is like a DJ set and film performance. And I recently did that in Paris, in an opera house. Actually, it had 360 screens.
Ooh.
So I edited a video that was played on the screen, sort of looking at the similarities between the dance styles in traditional West African dance cultures and Chicago house dance music. There are actually a lot of really interesting parallels. So like weaving that footage together was really fun. And I did a DJ set, like weaving the music together also at the same time.
Bravo.
Thank you. So yeah, that was my little sketch towards the research that I'll be doing. Yes. And Pearl, I'm also very interested to ask you, how do you feel like Chinese and African people can begin to have a dialogue between themselves? And what do you think?
You know, China and Africa has very long relationship. In 1949, when China becomes communist and America decided that they would embargo China. So all the Western countries did not do any trading with China. China, only trading partners was the African countries. So at the time, when you are African, you come to China, they give you a 5-star hotel. If you're white coming to China, you go to bread and breakfast. It was quite funny. It's only 1973 when Nixon arrived China, and then they lifted up the embargo. I think China only started trading and having trading with West is only starting with the late 1970s after Mao Zedong passed away in 1976. So from end of 70s, after Mao Zedong passed away, then they start trading really a lot with the West. Then China again in 2000 reopened the African-Chinese relationship. So you see there is a lot of Chinese presence in Africa. So they have a lot of investment in Africa. But I was told, and I read news about it, about there were Africans who doesn't like Chinese, because even if they build infrastructures, hospital and all that, they were bringing their Chinese workers rather than some using the African workers. So on the Chinese side, the explanation to me was that language barrier and works ethics, because Chinese will work 24 hours a day under very hot climate, and they will only ask for holidays. And that working ethics you can't find in other nationalities. So I hope that with that, the Chinese and Africans will have a better understanding. But I'm sure that culturally, I think, when you get deeper after trading, you want to learn about the culture. So that's a great platform for the cultural exchanges.
Yes, absolutely.
And actually this time during the Shanghai Art Fair, we are going to introduce some African artists. Actually, we did already last year in Baba Jindi. And then we are going to open his show in March in Shanghai.
Oh, wow.
So it will be quite, I think it will be refreshing.
Yes.
And there are so many different countries in Africa. So I need to visit.
Yeah, you need to visit them all.
Yeah, before I can really understand. I think, the few days I spent in Lagos, I only scraped the very, very superficial, elements about Africa. But now I have employed an African curator. So hopefully I'll learn little by little, because I was told by Nigeria, he said Nigeria is very complicated. There's so many tribes. You won't know at all. So because, each tribe has a different culture.
Distinct. Yes.
Distinct. So
yes.
Just in Nigeria,
exactly. You can spend your whole life. Yeah, you'll spend your whole life.
So I'm
meeting
you young African ladies and professionals. I'm hoping that you will teach me. So what is your next move? Besides after making your sister and sister.
I think my next move, I've been writing more, and I'd like to publish more of my writing to I see my films and music as a gateway for people to research and educate themselves about the continent and the diaspora. So getting more of my work as a writer published is something that's in the works. And, the amazing thing is I feel like stories to tell just sort of appear to me. So as much as I can plan, I know that it will just come and unfold. Sure. Like last time I was in Lagos, one of my grandmother's friends had heard about my film, and so invited me to film him. And so there's a community of old people in Lagos who are desperate for me to document their stories.
Wow.
Yes.
That's great.
So there's a lot.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I think that is fantastic. Thank you so much, Kemi.
Thank you so much, Pearl. I really appreciate speaking with you. Yes.
Love meeting you.
Thank you.